Good evening. My name is Brent Omanero. I'm speaking on behalf of Letras Latinas, the literary initiative at the University of Notre Dame's Institute for Latino Studies. Welcome to Season 2 of Curated Conversations, a Latinx Poetry Show. Letras Latinas is under the direction of Francisco Aragon, who served as MC for Season 1, a season whose episodes undertook deep dives into debut books, where each first book poet selected their own interlocutor. For Season 2, we're telling a different story, a transatlantic story, one that will feature conversations between US Latinx poets and British Latinx poets, respectively. Francisco Aragon and British Latinx poet Leo Boix are the co-artistic directors of the series, with additional assistance from British literary activist Natalie Teitler, who co-directs Un Nuevo Sol, our presenting partner in the UK. Yours truly will serve as MC. Season 2 is made possible thanks to a grant from the Poetry Foundation and the collaboration of the Writer Center in Bethesda, Maryland, who, once again, is our host and co-presenter, alongside Poet Lore. Special thanks to Zach Powers of the Writer Center for his crucial behind-the-scenes assistance. Tonight, we are sharing the 4th episode of the season, one which will present a conversation between Raina J. León and Juana Adcock. In this episode, Raina and Juana discuss their books, Black Godmother, This Body, and This Body of a Woman I Inhabit, respectively. In their conversation, Raina and Juana share their dreams before discussing how they experiment with form and technology, their experiences with collaboration and translation, and music and improvisation. They go on to discuss how their writing connects with time, with their ancestors, and with the larger world. Enjoy.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are you? Good to see you.
It's really good to see you. I'm really excited about this conversation after reading your work. And I know that you've been like traveling about the world. So to meet you when you are grounded and somewhat rested, I hope. I'm sure we'll have some ideas that percolate from the newness of movement too.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely been a time of movement for me, and I'm still not home, so still not quite grounded, but I've been really happy to have your work as kind of company during the last wee while, and just lots of ideas flowing from there. So thank you so much for your work.
Well, and even yours has traveled, right? Like you sent me your work from Scotland. It came to the States, but then it traveled with me to Italy because I'm starting a residency there, and then back again.
Oh, wow.
So our work has also been in flight.
Yeah, I like that. I like that idea. Traveling words.
Yeah. So I thought after looking at some of the examples from the previous curated conversations that we might begin with introducing ourselves. And so with that in mind, I thought I'd read, I think it's funny, the idea of me even doing this is reading my official bio myself, which is wild. So as if I am not myself. So this is what my bio says, which is Raina J. León, PhD, is Black, Afro-Boricua, and from Philadelphia, Lenni-Lenape ancestral lands. She is a mother, that's me, daughter, sister, madrina, comadre, partner, poet, writer, teacher, educator. She believes in collective action and community work, the profound power of holding space for the telling of our stories, and the liberatory practice of humanizing education. She, who is me, seeks out communities of care and craft and is a member of Carolina African American Writers Collective, Kavekanam, Canto Mundo, Macondo, among other creative communities. She's the author of Black Godmother, This Body, and I'm really excited because I know that that's where your primary emphasis was, and talking about that. Canticle of Idols, Boogeyman Dawn, and I'm really excited about talking about that one too. Sombra Dislocate, and the chapbooks Profeta Without Refuge and Areto to Atabe, Essays on the Mothering Self. And the bio goes long, but one of the things I wanted to emphasize there was that I am the founding editor of the Acentos Review, which has published for 15 years over 1,000 Latinx writers and creatives across different forms. And that I'm 42 and I recently retired as a full professor of education at St. Mary's College of California. And but I was only the third Black person to achieve that rank and the first Afro-Latina. And I now hold emeritus status, which is important. And I think I am the first Black person to have that rank and the third Latinx person. Which I think is important to mention, not for the affirmation and the accolades that speaks to for me, but saying that institutions with especially over 100 years, in some cases over 200 years of history, should not be working with firsts and thirds, that there needs to be more opening. So I currently work at Stonekeelis MFA. So, and who I am in this moment, I am actually, usually I'm very tired, but right now I'm real refreshed and I'm super excited to talk to you. I feel very colorful and I'm really joyous in my life and very centered and grounded, even with a lot of movement. So how about you? What does your bio say? And who are you really?
Wonderful. I love that. And congratulations for all of your achievements. And it's such an honor to speak to you. So I am a Mexican poet, translator, and editor based in Scotland. I'm also reading off my own bio. Let's see. She is the author of Manca and Split, which was a Poetry Book Society choice and was included in The Guardian's Best Poetry of 2019. And she is co-editor of the Anthology of Poetry by Latin American Women Temporary Archives, which is published with ARC Publications. And she is currently translating the Mè'phàà poet Hubert Matiúwàa, and his book, The Dog's Dreamt, is forthcoming this year. And Laura Wittner's translation of The Root, which is also forthcoming this year. And her most recent publication is Vestigial, which is a suite of poems responding to the work of the Scottish artist Alasdair Gray. And who am I right now? I am a person who has been traveling and writing and getting into lots of really interesting conversations with lots of different people. And I feel really joyous as well in this moment of my life because I feel like, I don't know, lots of new things are coming into shape and into being. And yeah, it's just really, really wonderful. So I'm really, really grateful to be here with you. And I just can't get over your red shawl. It's amazing. It's giving me so much joy. That's really cool.
So I really like checking questions, and I wonder if you might entertain this one because it comes because I was so powerfully motivated by a dream and that extended into my shower routine this morning that I'm wondering if you remember your dreams, like what is one strong truth or image that like stands out for you that you kind of return to a lot?
Yes, I do remember my dreams, and I keep a dream journal, and I've been doing that for many, many years. And I have periods of my life when I feel more disconnected to myself, and that's when I can't remember my dreams. But at the moment, I'm remembering them. And one that is recurrent is one where I face a giant tsunami coming my way, and I just realize that the only way to get through it is to kind of just breathe and, go with it in a way, kind of give myself over to it and instead of panicking or trying to escape or something like that. And I think I've applied that to a lot of my life. It's often that just, getting overwhelmed with work and what life throws at you or whatever. But yeah, just kind of giving myself over to it is something I try and apply. Yeah, what about you?
Yeah, a long while back, I was part of this collective of, it was called a Black Women X Dream Lab. And there were 8 of us gathered, women and gender nonconforming folks. And we were sharing dreams together and talking about the medicine that was for us, but also for others, community as a part of that. And once I had this vibrant dream, and the lesson within it ultimately was a repetition of release. So I think that that's actually really poignant to like let go and just trust it. And I was thinking about that too this morning, and I'm like just showering, and water is just such a conduit for memory and idea and connection and ancestor. And my mom and I have been talking about getting a space for a museum, a traveling museum that she founded. And I was like, oh, but she's been really holding back. She's been thinking about this for a year, and she's been saying, oh, I'm 70 years old. Why would I do this big thing? So many people I know are dying and this and the other. And we had a really poignant conversation about that this morning. But the dream was, oh no, and this space can hold a bookstore, and it can be called The Queen and the Lion, and it can be this ode to, and all of this was as the water was coming. And I thought about that dream of release, and just trust, right? And so who knows if that space is actually going to come into being, and if that bookstore will come into being. But I suppose those who join us, you heard it here first.
Absolutely. Well, I hope it does come into being. It sounds like it will, to me. But yeah, like best of luck with that. That sounds like an amazing project.
So do you have a poem to share?
Sorry?
Do you have a poem to share with us today before we get into the questions about the poems?
Yes. Well, actually, I was wondering about starting with the one that you pointed out, because I don't often read that one, and I don't know if that would fit with.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's go for it then. So it's called Becoming. We met up at the station. You were just out from work, suited, trilby hat. Long hair tied back and shades. At my place, you asked, do you want to see me? Half opened your bag to show me the materials, and I watched you take away layers. Buckle, knot, button, gold-plated cufflinks, the careful fold. Showing all your skin to then cover it again with other strata, thongs, tights, corset, bra. Like this, you said, a satiny top, bespangled, miniskirt, lick of liner, eyelash. The more you added, heel, earring, feather, blush, your shoulders turned more candid, your gestures more delicate, your ways more sunny and plain, till you became completely you.
I love that poem so much. Thank you so much for reading it. One of the things I love about it is around the transformation and just that aspect of release and trust, like that we were just talking about, is so present in this poem of letting go all the layers of the world and the revelation of becoming oneself, and the trust of that moment is just so beautiful. And I think that was one theme that emerged so strongly within my reading of your work, is that of transformation and connection with the body, and transformation in considering feeling and thinking, and how they can be intermingled and entangled in the most beautiful of ways. Not divorced from one another. And there was just so much wisdom in so many poems that reminded us of that truth. And the poem is so tight. It's so tight, and it's deceptively simple. But there's I'm so curious about how that poem emerged from you, and how you thought about constructing it, like the right form for it.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for that really generous and interesting reading, and the idea of transformation. And I hadn't actually even thought about transformation that much, but I really like the way that you receive it. And yeah, it's just really interesting. And I was just interested in our relationship with clothes and textiles, and why we feel the need to express ourselves through clothes. Like, in a way, it seems so kind of, I don't know, it should be kind of superficial or not important. But then actually watching my friend cross-dress, like kind of transforming their gender just through the materials that were on their skin, and just seeing how their kind of whatever it was that they were before that was just all shed away, and they seemed like so much more natural, and the beauty within that, I just thought was amazing. And it just made me think how, like, maybe we're never quite as fixed as we think we are, and how the self is a lot more fluid, and our identities are kind of shifting moment to moment, and how kind of, how important it is to have the ability to express ourselves through any means that we want in any moment, whether it's writing or clothing or any tools that we have available to us. And I guess clothing is an interesting tool because it doesn't require you actually speaking or kind of using words, or you're just kind of walking down the street, but you're expressing something. And it's something that I hadn't really thought about until that moment. And so that was partly why I wrote it.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah. What about you? Do you have a poem to share?
Yeah. So we shared our questions back and forth, and one that you raised is, I think, the one that I'd like to read, which is called Hubert, or a poem that was kind of intimated in that same section. Hubert. And I think the only thing that folks would need to know is elicottero in Italian is helicopter. And when my son was younger than 2, he would say koto for helicopter all the time. And also my son at like 18 months, 2 years old, became obsessed with punk music, like the louder, the better, which I hope that you'll also talk about your own musical work. And so all of a sudden I had this like toddler friendly punk list of BIPOC creatives. Like I was the mom who was finding punk for my 2-year-old.
Oh my God, I love that. I love that so much.
So like there's this line about the Screamo chorus, and he was making up these songs, right? Which I thought was amazing. So Hubert. Above us, there are no helicopters. Not like when the wind smelled like California soot, and every hour sirens wove their hair into ours and sung names to enchant cacophony. Say their names and we were home. Your sister, newborn in my arms, protecting her life, a protest. Weeks before, each time a plane scored the Berkeley sky in white, you would point up, say, Mama, because I am always in the sky, even when my skin burns in the sun next to yours. How my eyes leak with storms you cannot yet name. We stand in unhinged weather. There are no helicopters today. You bang on a wheelbarrow with dried bamboo stalks as drumsticks and lift your toddler's throat up to shout, Koto! Over and over again, a Screamo chorus, lyrics perfectly formed to your ears. I nod only, yes, and keep beat. At the People's Park, marchers assemble with banners of I can't breathe. San Pablo, I can hear the horns of a car parade inside, the mourners shout behind masks from open windows while a virus flies around us all, pandemic and crown and white. Surrounded by fences, I can keep you safe and breathing until I can't. Every door has the threat of splinter. There are no helicopters today. Koto! You yell. Somewhere they descend. Somewhere a body hangs halfway between metal and earth. So that poem, which I think is this great encapsulation of a connection with community and political and community issues and change and concern for my babies, and also a recognition of who we are as family and me as mother. And so my son in particular appears a lot in the book, as you know. And in that instance is one of the time, he even has a piece of art that's actually closing the book, right? Which for those who pick up the book, and there's a note at the very beginning that I think most people pass by, which is that if you have an app called Halo AR and you hold the app towards the art, then you have all these video editions or music or interviews with me, and it changes seasonally. And so his art is a cueing point for a video as well. So there's a lot of back and forth between family and also thinking about engagement with the world.
Oh, there's so much I want to ask you about that. And it's so interesting to see how you're weaving all these things together. In particular, I downloaded that app and I couldn't get it to work. So maybe I was like, I don't understand how this works. But I did get into the QR codes that you have woven into this one and the Bogeyman Dawn. And I just really love that because it's such a nice way to reference your work. For example, when you have a poem and then you have the news article that relates to that. And I just thought that was such a great idea. And and you even have like a soundtrack accompanying it, don't you? Are you planning on using more technology, or how do you view the relationship of technology and your work, between technology and your work?
Yeah, so I used to especially teach about how to teach with technology. I am like such a techie person. So I've got way too many gadgets around me, even in my studio, which I can't show anybody. That's why I have this wonderful screen, because it's a product of the messiness of my head. But like,
I love the idea that behind you is really this like mad scientist lab with full of like all these like wires connecting everywhere. And
there's a sewing machine back there. There's art supplies, acrylics, just everywhere. It's an explosion. So it's like everything is contained. But technology, ever since I was a kid, like watching Star Trek reruns, I have been fascinated by like just immersion into the future and thinking about the future and sci-fi and fantasy as well. And then my aunt in particular is my mom's sister is also a techie, trekker kind of person. And so she used to have in our house, she used to go to the thrift shop, thrift sales and the flea markets and everything, and buy old computers and then refashion them into what she wanted and everything. And I just remember going into this room filled with all these lights and bells and whistles and keyboards and this and the other, in this very suburban space, but like you open the door and it's wonder space. It's like robots and all this stuff, and being wow. Oh my goodness. And just captivated, absolutely enthralled with what was possible with a soldering iron, right? That's not my skill set, wow. But I can imagine how to use technology in different ways. And I think that the page is such an invitation for exploration of poetic form, like sonnets, like villanelles, like pantoums, like that's in my work too. And also the space of the page, like let's have a poem that goes across two pages. Let's have a poem that folds. Let's have a poem that has QR codes embedded in them, some that work, some that don't. What does that say when the link is dead? And we're talking about the dead, right? So and thinking about how to use AR within. So I'm always trying to explore and expand. And obviously I'm getting really I'm nerding out, like I'm geeking out about the possibilities. And I love talking about this. And I love that you asked me this question because nobody does. Or not a lot of people do. And it gets me really excited.
That's so amazing. I just really love it when people start to nerd out on something. It's my favorite mode of conversation, and like talking about, you know, whatever it is that's really niche and that they're really into. So I really love that. And I love the idea of the poem expanding across, like from the page into other mediums and you know, just other tools. And I saw as well that you use images in your work, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about those and how it is, you know, if the process of creating those images connects with your writing process, if one comes from the other, or they happen at different stages.
Yeah, with Black Godmother's Body, that's the book that I started to have a lot of images within, and really coming from an emerging visual art practice in conversation with archival records. So I was doing a lot of collage work, digital collage, in creating representations of particularly of Blackness and Black women as in connection with the galaxies and otherworldliness and the interstellar, as well as doing color studies in connection with Blackness. And then it expanded to me thinking about my family history and archival record and how to be in conversation with those records in a creative space. And so some digital collages, for example, that don't appear, there's one that features my great-great-great-grandfather, Harry Logan, who had lived his life enslaved, and at the end of the Civil War was able to gather his family back, and who had all these different last names, which actually speaks to the forced selling of his family away from him. I learned later that he also was an amputee after trying to escape and being brought back, trying to escape for his freedom, right? There were so many stories that I learned from going down to South Carolina. And there's this, there are two collages, one that surrounds him with flowers. There's an archival photograph of him that's still shared within the family. It's within a family funeral home actually right now. And then another, which doesn't have anything to do with an actual archival photograph, but intimates or uses a picture of his former blacksmith shop and overlays deeds and me working with digital watercolors over top of, and a lot of conversation that way. And then in this one, there are these digital collages that also incorporate, like, there's one that has the eyes of my great grandparents who separated from Puerto Rico. She remained, she never left. And he ended up moving to New York and then ultimately to Philadelphia, and talking about the impact of that fissure. And it has their marriage record too, which is so amazing to me because it had their addresses on it before they were married. So I could see that they actually lived really close to one another, and they both had the same similar job. They were tobacco, like cigar rollers. And the street, the neighborhood where they lived in Puerto Rico was Sal Si Puedes, which translates into like leave if you can, which is fascinating to me, of like what was gained and what was lost in the leaving. And so this conversation in color and in document and with ancestors, and then that comes as its own kind of visual poem within the book. And then that is a cue for another video, which changes. So it's an opportunity to like expand and explore and offer a sense of what I'm thinking, but also like allow folks to have their own interpretations.
I love that.
I'm actually really curious about your connection with visual work too, because I had the great fortune of also reading This Body of a Woman I Inhabit. And it's this incredible book, which has a collaboration with Nikki R. Scott. Are they pen drawings?
I think it's pencil, pen, a little bit of watercolor. And I think that might be it.
Yeah. But these incredible. And they're like these images of the body, of the serpent body. There's English and Spanish. It's a book that you can turn over and have an entirely different translation. So I'm curious about what that, how you all approached the collaboration. Was the poem there first? Was the art there first? Was it a conversation? How did this emerge?
Well, I met Nikki R. Scott at a poetry festival in Wales. She's Welsh, and she does this forum which she calls poetry comics, which is basically translating poems into a graphic novel style. And she's done that with the work of many poets. And so she approached me and asked if she could do this particular poem. This poem is from my collection Manca, which looks at kind of the body, dismemberments, beheadings, erasures, fractures, self-harm, and it's all kind of in the context of the Mexican drug war. That's why it sounds so horrible. But I was trying to look at the connection between that and our relationship to ourselves and our own bodies, and particularly as women. And so, her interpretation of this poem, I really love, and she called it a double translation exercise for her, because this is a poem that I originally wrote in Spanish, and then I translated it into English myself. But as happens often with self-translation, the original doesn't stay stable. Like you realize, oh, actually, I'd like to rewrite that bit in the other language, and so on. And I was trying to, I left one word in Spanish in the English translation, and that's the word from. Like that, it should be the least untranslatable word ever, because it's just a preposition. It's just a like connecting little dot between different things. But for me, there was so much in there. And also like the way I'm using the word desde, it should be more like whence, or from which, or from where. But all of these options seemed like far too clunky and just not what we would normally say in a poem. I don't know, it just seemed somehow wrong. And desde has this musicality to it as well, this kind of almost alliterative thing, and the way it's placed in the body when you say it, desde, it kind of goes more into your chest. It's kind of more resonant, whereas from, it feels so kind of in the air, like just kind of it stays here. It doesn't even enter the body. So I wanted to really highlight that, and I was talking a lot about that as well, like the way language enters the body and where we feel the words as we're speaking them. And I really had nothing to do with how she translated this into images. I just saw the final result almost, but it was funny because she translated into images from the Spanish version. And then when she went to put in the English version, she's like, wait, you skipped a bit, like you took this bit out. And it was one phrase, which was agarrarse los huevos, which is, means like gathering courage or something. But I just took it out because I didn't want to put a literal translation, which would be basically grabbing one's balls.
Right.
but she kept the image of like a hand grabbing. So she was like, wait, but then that bit of the poem is going to be absent. But I just felt that it read in a different way. And I just really liked the end result. All these ideas of translation and going into image and so on, and the way that she depicted the bodies, I felt that really worked with the entire collection, even though it's not referenced in that particular comic in any way. But yeah.
I thank you so much for talking about the Diode, because that was something that I keyed in on, of the untranslatable, and yet it is translatable. And what does that mean for you, that was persistent throughout the two languages, the two sides? And I'm so happy that you talked about that. I'm also fascinated. My mind is blown by the idea of the way we feel the words, the way we enter the words as we are speaking them. And I think about how that must influence you as translator too, when you're approaching someone else's work, of like, oh, this is the actual translation, this is what it means, but it doesn't feel the same. And so I'm just so fascinated. Like, I have another question around collaboration, with how you approach collaboration in that sense of like getting to the essence of the meaning, whether it's in translation of like, I'm translating this thing into this other language, but it doesn't feel the same, and I've got to get into that absolute sense. Or I really want you to talk about your work as a bassist too, and how that collaboration happens. Of, we have an idea for a song, but it has to feel right. Can you talk about that? Feeling and thinking.
Yeah. Thank you. That's such a huge question as well.
I know.
It's like, I don't even know where to start, and I don't want to like take up all of the time. But yeah, I guess when translating, I'm reaching for that. I'm reaching for how it feels, for the effect it produces in the reader, which is me. But I'm also trying to imagine what the other readers might feel and experience when they're reading that. So, like, if the character is talking super formally and the effect is kind of comical, then I want it to feel that way in the translation. I want the kind of slightly out of placeness to be there, and not to like just comb it all out and make it all smooth, because the original had that intentional kind of slight dislocation or something. And that can always also, be a kind of difficult ground, because then the editor comes in and goes, wait, that doesn't sound right. And I'm like, yeah, it doesn't sound right in the original either. That's why I put it that way. It's not that I made a mistake, that's intentional. And, sometimes there's always a negotiation there with the editor, like, okay, well, what can we do to make it not seem like the translator made a mistake, but that the author was reaching for that effect. And yeah, so it's always kind of a bit of a process of kind of walking on a slight, tightrope of some sort. And not falling too much to one side or the other. And in terms of music, I mean, that's a whole other area. I love music. I think poetry is music, and I'm always watching out for sound and the music of words, and whether that's, I mean, I don't normally write in form or meter or anything like that, but I think each work, well, not I think, but I would like each work to have its own internal music, whether that's in the syllables themselves or in the form on the page, or the way a concept is woven together in the whole, like it's an album. One friend told me that when he read Split, he felt like it was this psychedelic concept album, and it's and that's my favoritist review that I've ever received ever in the whole world. Yes, so definitely music is important. And when I was playing in a band, our process for writing songs was basically to just jam and then pick out bits that we liked and then put them together, and the words always came after. The words came from the music. And I think more or less that's how my own writing process works, even if I don't have instruments to hand. But yeah, music has a huge importance in your work as well. You have, I was seeing in, like you have a tango criollo, there's a DJ, there's like different things. And I was just wondering, and even the fact that you've got a soundtrack accompanying your work, and you've got the conversación, to dance without words, where you're referencing certain songs and kind of almost as a response to that. So I was just wondering about music and your work as well.
Yeah. Also, psychedelic concept album, like that should be on business cards, on like websites, like, hello, this is my book. It was described as a psychedelic concept album. Excellent. But my first book, Canticle of Idols, I bought the rights to last year, and I did with a producer a soundscape. So we reinvented 12 tracks or 12 poems from the book as a soundscape. So music is huge. And I love what you said around like the consideration of each word, of each line in connection with its music. Because when I'm composing, when I'm writing a piece, part of my editing process is also to read it aloud a lot at readings, of course, to myself. But my what's informing that is also a listening to the music of the line and trying to make sure that the rhythm is connected to the feeling that I want to create in myself as a reader, as well as hopefully in someone who's reading and listening. But I myself am I've dabbled into different effects and different levels in music as a vocalist, as a cellist, as a piano player, as a clarinet player along the way. And I love like some classic vinyl albums, and I have always loved really listening to the music of how people speak to one another, and storytelling, like that is its own vibe. And I even have this poem that was one of my most difficult things. It has never appeared in a book, and someday it will, but it's written as a score, where the poem words are actually notes, and it has parts for 12 characters. So it's meant to be read by the characters themselves up and down, and also across as an entirely different character. But the composition on the page is as a score. So you look at the...
Oh, wow.
So it took me forever.
Wow.
To get the thing. But it's so convoluted. Like, how do I give a publisher, like, look, it's a score. Like, can you play it? It works. Oh, it works.
That sounds amazing, though. That is absolutely amazing. And maybe it's one for like, technology and hybridity to come in somehow, for it to be like an interactive thing on the screen, or an app or something where you're touching a character and it plays a note.
Reality.
Yeah. More and more expansion. I love that. That is so cool.
But
that is so cool.
Huge consideration in my work. And I love that rung true for you in your reading of it?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I also wanted to ask you, just circling back to the poem you read, Hover, because there's a bunch of other things I wanted to ask you about from there. One is about, writing about motherhood and how you weave together these like really kind of simple, kind of almost like mundane details of like raising a child and what they're looking at, and the naming of the colors, which is in one of the poems that you have, the only color, and how you weave that into these massive political processes and ideas and colorism, and like the death of George Floyd, which was kind of happening around the same time as you giving birth, and coronavirus, and what it was like to give birth during this time, and the like systemic violence present in every aspect of life, but also in the medical sphere and gynecology and so on. And also somewhat connected, but also a separate question all of its own, is what you were talking about, being in conversation with family history and how you write memoir into your poems, and what that process is like for you. It's almost like looking at your ancestors and then looking at your children and you being in the middle, and how you weave it all together. I think it's so beautiful and gives so much food for thought. So yeah, I wanted to ask you about that.
So I think that I have a thoughtfulness around time, and that comes through a lot in the book as well. These explorations of time and generations, and understanding the past to understand this present, and imagine a future, right? And think about what the future can be and what I want it to be. And so I all of these things are happening all at the same time. I was talking to some members of collective the other day, Earthseed, and we were talking about ancestral histories in connection with reparations, and how the trauma of the past is still happening. It's still happening within our bodies, within our communities. And if we don't recognize it, if we don't see it for what it is, then it will still have its effects. There's a poem by Alasdair Gray, and I think about it all the time, which is called On History, if I remember correctly, where she writes about a poet who's on this panel and everybody's talking about history. And the poet in the poem tells a story. Instead of like, here are all the facts and the scholarly and the citation and everything, she's like, no, let me tell you a story. And she talks about grief. I think it's actually on grief. And how in that poem that there is a string that's hanging in the window, as I recall. And if she doesn't deal with that string of grief, it's going to hurt somebody. And so she's got to deal with the grief as a gift to the future, as a gift to her community now, as a gift to herself. And the poem is so much more beautiful, and I'm probably getting so much of it wrong, but definitely check out that poem from Alasdair Gray in the Black Maria, the Black Mariah. And I just think about that too, of we've got to engage and remember and reclaim history, and think about its effect on this moment, and keep an eye on the world, not just on our own navels. I think, that connection to the world and the dead, both historical and current. In the Juarez poem that you wrote in Split, the Juarez Ecatepec poem, which recounts the numbers of the dead, both historical and current, of massacres in Mexico. And you write the poem. It starts with the collective we and talks about the massacre of 11 girls. And it's heart-wrenching. Like, that poem is shaking, and the brutality that it brings us into in this collective we. And it still weaves in this critique of the machine in connection with the dress of the murdered. So I'm really interested too in your attention to fabric and the fabric of our lives, right? And the machine that also leads to the instrument of murder, this stone that is raised, right? And then we shift in these sections of the poem from like the personal to the observer, the seeker of the information, with like an activist intent, like, let's transform this. This can't continue to happen. And then we move into this invocation to raise the dead for action and change. And I think that that's actually a connection within our works, because in Black Godmother's Body, there's also a poem that seeks to raise the dead and talks about the power of the dead as part of movement. Your poem ends with the lines, "Let us be a bridge." So I'm really curious about like the drive within you as poet, the work of it. What's the work of this poem, and what is the transformative work of the bridge?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I don't know, it's kind of a strange thing, like, why would I choose to write about such violent things and in such excruciating detail? And sometimes I wonder about, whether that's even ethical to do that, or, whether, I don't know, like, I'm always a little bit not sure. But it has been something that I have written about a lot, particularly, with researching the Mexican drug war and trying to think about what could possibly be happening in the world for these things to take place. It's kind of unthinkable and unfathomable at so many levels. Like, it's absurd. It doesn't make any sense. And so in my attempts to understand how this could be real and to feel the reality of it, is where I reach for poetry, and in my wanting to transform it. Really, that's always, I think it's really important to speak about the intention behind writing it, because it's very easy to write violent things just for effect, or to cause a shock and awe kind of thing. But for me, it has to be about reaching for some kind of transformation, or I think there's a lot of desensitization going on in the world. Like, we're so used to seeing gore on the news, and it's just become so mundane, like our access to images and so on. So I really, really hope that, poetry can be a space where we can become sensitive to those images again. And one way could be to describe them in a poem that can cause an effect. And so this is speaking about the phenomenon of the femicides in Mexico. And it's funny because this started in the 90s in Tijuana, like around Tijuana, the kind of border area of Mexico, where there were lots of maquiladoras being installed. And, like, big multinational companies were realizing that there was cheap labor in Mexico. And so they were creating all these job opportunities for women who lived in rural areas, and mass migration was happening because of this. So women essentially going to work in the factories and becoming extremely vulnerable, because, often their shifts would start at 4 a.m. or whatever, and they were alone without their families. And so they were seen as kind of easy prey. But the media at the time was speculating that there was just one serial killer who was killing all these women, that it wasn't a social phenomenon that was happening. And thanks to the research of of this guy called Sergio González Rodriguez, who's now passed away, but he used to be a journalist and a poet and a philosopher and a musician, and this incredible man. He was analyzing all the reports and all of the stuff that was going on. He actually traveled there out of his own pocket to research what was going on, and he figured out that it was not one serial killer. It was actually something that was happening in society, something that was broken in society. And I just found his work so interesting, and to think about, how poetry has this ability to allow us to zoom out and not look at just one thing, but also look at the connection between all of the things. And I think it's what you do as well in your poems. You're talking about crayons, but actually it's not about crayons. It's not about school. It's not about this. It's about everything, and how this reflects something that is broken within our society, and something that needs our attention, and how, everything can be connected back to these systemic violences. And so I wanted to really draw attention to the violence against women, and how it's used to almost to police women who aren't complying with the traditional patriarchal structure, which in this case would have been for women to stay at home and not be out migrating and working in factories and so on. And how that kind of is still continuing until today. And a lot of what we see in the news in Mexico is about, finding the disappeared, right? Someone who was just randomly abducted and murdered, often women. And then, the bones being found somewhere, and all this identification of bones. And what do you do with that? Like, what can our minds possibly do with this horror? And so I was imagining, this scenario where we just like breathe life back into the bones, and they all rise up and join a giant movement for justice or something. And you can say that's just a kind of poetic image or whatever, but like if that could happen in reality, how many things would change, right?
Really appreciate what you also bring in this of pushing that the work of the poem is also to connect to the body and the knowledge of the body, and like sensorially make someone care and like feel it as if this is their own story. And I deeply believe in the power of the poem to do that work. I talk about all the time with folks how, there's this aphorism of kings fear philosophers and poets, because philosophers are the ones that prompt ideas, right? Push forward an idea, but poets are the ones who take the idea and help you to feel it as your own. And that's at the root of movement, right? Like that's what galvanizes people into collective action, right? And so I think about that too in the poem that begins Split, which is the serpent dialogues. And we start with like the most innocuous, like, when the woman realized the snake was scared of her too, she went back to the balcony. Okay, all right, what's happening now? And there's so much regard and wisdom from the serpent. And also the woman is like, at one point the serpent disappears and she's like, wait, what just happened? I waited, I waited all this time, and gets really upset at the snake. And the snake is like, I had business to do. Like, I'm a snake. So like, trust in the rhythms. I was going to come back. Like, then they make an agreement of like being tied together, and that doesn't work so well. But I think that's fascinating to explore, like the ties between humanity and nature, and what we can learn, the invitation to learn of exactly this connection between feeling and thinking. And like, there's even this line of like the woman asking about desire. And she says, is it something you feel or something you think? And the snake, oh, well, I have to read that whole thing. The snake says, I follow desire as one follows a thread of light or a half-remembered song you can't get out of your head. I'm always seeking the next note. Think of desire as an artichoke. Towards the heart, the petals become finer until they're barely as thick as a hair. At the center, there's nothing but a magnetic force like the eye of a cyclone. And the woman says, is it something you feel or something you think? And the snake says, to me, there's no difference. Only men want to leave the body to define themselves as an intellect in opposition to it, like Descartes. I use my body as a tool for knowledge. And I love that. I love that the snake is like, yo, there is a combination between these two, and your body is a tool for knowledge. And in that is the feeling, in that is the desire. And that connects even to the poem of horror, which says you can't think your way out of it. You can't read that news article and then turn the page. You got to feel this as if this is your sister, as if this is your neighbor, as if this is your beloved. You got to feel this. And I really appreciate the daring and the strength of that work.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your reading of that. I love that so much. I think you use your body as a tool for knowledge as well in your own work with these explorations of motherhood, and the phrase you have about trauma, which I'm just looking for it now. It's like how quickly we forget when trauma teaches to not forgive is to eat your own body. How quickly we forgive when trauma teaches. So yeah, that's talking more about like intergenerational trauma and childhood and so on. But I think that's so important as well to have the attention on the body and what it teaches us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the poem that's in is like this really long lyric essay, and it explores a really difficult relationship with someone I love very deeply, and our relationship is fraught. But in seeing that relationship and writing about it, the reason that I was writing the essay was this relationship is one of my models for mothering. And I want to be a different kind of mother to my babies. So what can I learn from the hurt of that interaction over years and the trauma of it and its impact on internalized racism and challenging that, and its impact on me thinking about what is a woman's place in the world and what I received in language and action, and what do I want for myself? What do I want for my daughter? And it also helped me to see that relationship for the complexities of it. I look back on it with greater generosity than I did living it, because I've thought too about all the things that were informing her relationship, her coming up, and how she could model that mothering with me. And the lyric essay is also a movement, and I hope an example of healing by the end, and saying, yes, you can reveal the difficulty. I'm still invited to family dinners. I
was going to ask you that, like, how courageous, I think that's the most courageous thing one can ever do, is write about family and write about these relationships, because you know, like, it's somehow things that you don't want to upset the people that you love, your family, and I don't know, like, I just wanted to ask you about that quickly. I think we're at about an hour.
I know, we're almost there. We're there.
I didn't want to, like, go away without knowing this. I'm glad to know you're still invited to family dinners.
I still got the invite, and we cool. But I think that's a model for, like, for not holding back because of fear of not being invited to the family dinner, or saying something that that might trigger whatever response, if you feel it is the truth, then you can defend it as a truth. And I think that no matter what that's one thing that's always been part of my story in writing, is that sometimes what people will ask me, well, this was like so brave of you to talk about this particular aspect. And I'm like, nobody can hurt me with what I've shared. My story is my story. And it is true in that moment, my understanding of it is what it is. And perhaps when I look back, it may change through a different lens of my life, but nobody can hurt me with my own story. So I trust that. And I know we're at time. This was such a good conversation.
I know. I feel like I could speak for another 3 hours.
I know.
So much to talk about. I really, really love your work. Thank you. Thank you so much for writing it, because I feel like it's taught me so much in my own journey and in my own process. And yeah, I hope we're gonna meet again sometime so we can keep chatting.
It's been a long time since I've been in Scotland, but now I got a reason.
Exactly. Well, mi casa es tu casa.
Come on to Philly. All right, thank you.
Thank you so much, Raina. Take care.
You too.
And that concludes episode 4 to season 2 of Curated Conversations, a Latinx Poetry Show. Please join us in a couple of months on Tuesday, October 24th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time for episode 5, which will feature a conversation between poets Adriana Diaz Enciso and Alexandra Litton Regalado. Please register on the Writers Center website to attend the premiere. Until then, I'm Brent Manero, a 2022-2023 Poetry Coalition Fellow, speaking on behalf of Letras Latinas. Thank you for joining us.